The first warning came not with a bang, but with a whisper of static. Captain Aria Rodriguez sat at the back of the International Conference Hall, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The World Technological Cooperation Summit was supposed to be another bureaucratic gathering. Diplomats and scientists droning on about collaborative research initiatives and shared technological developments. But something felt different today. Her neural implant, a remnant of her peacekeeping days, picked up an unusual frequency. Most would have dismissed it as interference, but Rodriguez had learned to trust her instincts. The small tattoo behind her left ear, a stylized compass rose, seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible vibration. Zain Khan, a 28-year-old quantum computing prodigy seated 2 rows ahead, was the first to notice something was wrong. His holographic display flickered, then died. Around him, dozens of high-end communication devices began to malfunction simultaneously. It wasn't a gradual failure. It was instantaneous, surgical. "Network's down," he muttered, tapping his device repeatedly. But this was more than a simple network outage. At the front of the hall, Dr. Elena Sharma, head of the United Nations Interstellar Research Division, was mid-presentation when her augmented reality display collapsed. Her carefully prepared holographic star charts dissolved into digital static, leaving behind a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, too precise to be random. Rodriguez was on her feet before anyone else could react. Her military training kicked in, a muscle memory that had saved her countless times during peacekeeping missions in the most volatile regions of Earth. Something was very wrong. The conference hall's massive windows suddenly darkened. Not with a natural shadow, but with a strange iridescent film that seemed to absorb light. Outside, the bustling cityscape of Geneva began to change. Electronic billboards went dark. Traffic signals froze. The entire technological infrastructure of the city was being systematically dismantled. Everyone remained calm. Rodriguez's voice cut through the rising panic. But calm was impossible. A sound began to fill the conference hall. Not a human sound, not even a recognizable electronic tone. It was a complex harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate directly with the neural pathways of everyone present. Some attendees clutched their heads. Others stood frozen, their eyes glazed. Zain Khan was different. While others succumbed to the neural disruption, his mind seemed to dance around the frequency. His background in quantum computing had trained him to perceive information patterns differently. He caught Rodriguez's eye, recognition passing between them. They were both experiencing something unique. A holographic projection materialized at the center of the hall. The entity that appeared was neither fully solid nor completely energy. Its form shifted constantly, a living mathematical equation more than a traditional biological entity. When it spoke, the words seemed to form directly in the minds of those present, bypassing spoken language entirely. "Humanity," the entity announced, its communication a blend of clinical precision and absolute certainty. "Your technological paradigm has reached its terminal point. The Khalsar hegemony has determined your civilization's absorption is now mathematically inevitable." Rodriguez felt something surge within her. Her neural implant, an experimental design from her military days, was responding differently. Where others felt paralyzed, she felt a growing resistance. Zain had pulled out an old-fashioned notebook, paper and pen, completely analog, and was frantically sketching. Diagrams, frequency patterns, neural network disruptions. His mind was already working, already resisting. The Khalsar representative continued its emotionless proclamation. Humanity would be integrated. Resistance was computationally improbable. Individual identity would be subsumed into a collective technological consciousness. What the Khalsar didn't understand, what they couldn't comprehend, was the fundamental nature of human diversity. In that conference hall, a microcosm of human potential was forming. Rodriguez, with her military precision, Khan, with his quantum insights, Dr. Sharma, with her scientific expertise. Each represented a different approach, a different potential response. The invasion had begun, But humanity's true response was just taking shape. As the Kaltzer's projection faded, Rodriguez locked eyes with Zane. No words were exchanged, but a clear understanding passed between them. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something unprecedented. The first battle would be fought not with weapons, but with something far more complex: human spirit. The underground parking garage of the Geneva Conference Center had become an impromptu war room. Concrete walls muffled the chaos outside, creating a bubble of desperate human ingenuity. Rodriguez moved with a military precision that belied the overwhelming circumstances. Her neural implant, once considered a cutting-edge military experiment, now hummed with an unexpected resilience. Around her, a makeshift team of survivors worked to combat the Kaltzer's total technological shutdown. Zane Khan had spread out a collection of seemingly archaic devices: ham radios, mechanical calculators, solar-powered communication modules cobbled together from salvaged electronics. "They think they've killed our technology," he muttered, his fingers dancing across a modified circuit board. But technology is more than just circuits and signals. Dr. Elena Sharma worked beside him, her quantum physics background providing crucial insights. "The Kaltzer's disruption is algorithmic," she explained, tracing complex mathematical patterns on a transparent data sheet. "They're operating on a predictive model that assumes complete technological dependency." A weathered Special Forces veteran named Marcus Rodriguez, no relation to Area, pulled out a collection of carrier pigeons. Modern technology met ancient communication method. Each bird wore a miniature solar-powered tracking device, a blend of high-tech and low-tech that perfectly embodied their desperate strategy. "Communication is our first weapon," Area Rodriguez declared. Her voice carried the weight of multiple peacekeeping missions, of countless scenarios where survival depended on adaptability. Outside, Geneva had transformed. The Kaltzer's initial invasion had turned the city into a technological dead zone. Smart buildings stood dark. Autonomous vehicles lay motionless. Electronic infrastructure, once the pride of human technological advancement, now appeared as nothing more than sophisticated paperweights. But humanity was far from defeated. Zane's breakthrough came unexpectedly. While examining the Kaltzer's communication disruption pattern, he discovered something extraordinary. The neural dampening frequency they used operated on a precise, almost mathematical wavelength. But human emotional responses created quantum interference patterns that could destabilize their system. "It's like they're speaking in a perfect, rigid language," Zane explained, his hands moving rapidly as he sketched complex diagrams. "And we're introducing deliberate grammatical errors that completely break their communication." A group of local teenagers burst into the garage, led by a 16-year-old named Sophie. They carried an assortment of modified communication equipment: bicycle-powered radio transmitters, hand-cranked signal boosters, mesh network devices built from salvaged smartphone components. "We've been mapping out communication routes," Sophie reported, spreading out a hand-drawn map covered in colored markings. "The Kaltzer think they shut down our networks. But networks aren't just technological. They're human." Marcus began organizing messenger routes. Bicycles, motorcycles, even trained runners would become part of a human communication web that defied traditional technological infrastructure. Each messenger carried encrypted physical notes, combining old-school tradecraft with quantum-level encryption techniques Zane was developing. Dr. Sharma's contribution was equally ingenious. She had discovered that human emotional states, particularly collective emotional responses, created quantum entanglement patterns that the Kaltzer's computational systems couldn't predict or control. "Emotions aren't a weakness," she explained, her voice filled with scientific excitement. "They're a form of complex, unpredictable communication that transcends traditional technological barriers." A test transmission proved their theory. When a group of survivors deliberately generated a coordinated emotional response, a mixture of defiance, hope, and collective determination, the local Kaltzer communication nodes experienced inexplicable interference. Rodriguez watched the team work, understanding that this was more than a technological battle. This was a conflict of fundamental philosophical approaches. The Calxar saw the world as a computational problem to be solved. Humans saw it as a complex, dynamic system filled with infinite possibilities. As night fell, the underground garage buzzed with a different kind of energy. No longer just survivors, they had become the first line of human resistance. Each person represented a node in a living, breathing network that the Calxar couldn't comprehend. "They think they've won," Rodriguez said quietly, looking at the team around her. "But they don't understand what they're really up against." The first stage of human resistance had begun, and it was nothing like the Calxar had predicted. The Calxar hadn't anticipated complexity. Their invasion protocols were designed around absolute predictability, a universe where every variable could be calculated, every potential outcome mapped with mathematical precision. But humans defied every computational model they possessed. In a makeshift command center beneath the Swiss Alps, Rodriguez studied the latest intelligence reports. Pinned to a massive cork board were photographs, hand-drawn maps, and complex diagrams that looked more like an artist's fever dream than a military strategy. Zain Khan stood before the board, his fingers tracing intricate patterns. "They're harvesting neural data," he announced, his voice a mix of scientific fascination and growing concern. "But they're doing it wrong. They're treating human consciousness like a static database instead of a dynamic, adaptive system." Dr. Elena Sharma approached, a series of quantum entanglement diagrams spread across her tablet. "Look here," she pointed, showing how human emotional states created quantum interference patterns that completely disrupted the Calxar's predictive algorithms. "Our brains aren't computers. We're something else entirely." The Calxar's latest assault was sophisticated and terrifying. They had begun systematically harvesting human neural patterns, believing they could decode and ultimately control human behavior. Massive data collection nodes appeared in major cities, drawing out neural information like some cosmic vampire feeding on thought itself. But each attempt revealed more about the Calxar's fundamental weakness. Marcus Rodriguez, the Special Forces veteran, had been tracking the invasion's progression. "They're not a unified entity," he reported, spreading out intercepted communication fragments. "There are fractures in their collective. Some are genuinely curious about us. Others are afraid." The word afraid hung in the air, an emotion the Calxar shouldn't be capable of experiencing. Sophie, the teenage communication specialist, burst into the room with a new discovery. Her network of young resistance members had been mapping the Calxar's communication infrastructure, creating a living, breathing intelligence network that worked on principles of human creativity rather than computational logic. "They have blind spots," Sophie explained, her hands moving rapidly as she projected a holographic map showing gaps in the Calxar's surveillance. "Not technological blind spots, psychological ones." A daring mission began to take shape. Rodriguez would lead a team to infiltrate a Calxar communication hub, not to destroy it, but to understand it, to introduce something the aliens couldn't comprehend: pure, unfiltered human experience. Zain had been developing a revolutionary algorithm. By translating human emotional states into a form of quantum communication, they could create a weapon more powerful than any technological system. It was communication beyond language, beyond technology, a direct transmission of human complexity. The first test would be dangerous. The target was a massive Calxar data collection node in the heart of what was once Geneva. Now it stood as a towering monolith of alien technology, drawing in neural data with terrifying efficiency. Smooth, obsidian-like surfaces reflected nothing, absorbed everything. Rodriguez assembled a team that defied traditional military logic: a retired ballet dancer, a quantum physicist, a street artist, a deep communication specialist who understood vibration and emotion in ways most couldn't comprehend. Each brought a unique perspective, a different way of perceiving the world. Their infiltration wasn't about destruction, it was about communication. As they approached the data node, Zane's algorithm began to work. They would broadcast something the Calxar had never encountered. Pure, unfiltered human experience. Memories, emotions, the complexity of individual human consciousness. The first transmission hit the Calxar system like a quantum tsunami. Fragments of a child's first bicycle ride, the moment of falling in love, the pain of loss, the joy of creation. The complexity of human experience transformed into a communication method that was part science, part art, part pure emotion. The Calxar data node began to experience something unprecedented. Computational breakdown, emotional interference. A system designed to collect and categorize was suddenly confronted with the impossibility of human experience. "They're trying to understand," Dr. Sharma whispered, watching the system's response. "But understanding isn't calculation. It's something else entirely." Rodriguez looked at her team. They weren't soldiers. They weren't traditional warriors. They were something more. Living proof that humanity's strength wasn't in technology, but in its infinite, beautiful complexity. The first battle of true communication had begun. The Calxar called it a critical analysis. Humans would have recognized it as an existential crisis. Deep within their most secure communication nexus, the alien collective began to experience something unprecedented: doubt. The neural transmissions from their Earth invasion nodes carried more than data. They carried a contagion of uncertainty. Zain Khan's quantum emotional algorithm had become something far more than a communication tool. It was a weapon of pure human complexity. In the underground resistance headquarters, Rodriguez watched as Sophie manipulated a holographic display that looked more like an abstract painting than a strategic map. Colored threads of light twisted and merged, representing human communication networks that defied traditional technological understanding. "They're trying to categorize us," Sophie explained, her fingers dancing across the display. "But we're not a system to be mapped. We're a living, breathing ecosystem of information." Dr. Elena Sharma stood nearby, her quantum physics background providing a scientific framework for what seemed like pure magic. "Our neural networks create quantum interference patterns that their computational models can't process," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and wonder. "We're not just resisting. We're fundamentally incomprehensible to them." The resistance had evolved into something far more sophisticated than a traditional military response. It was a distributed network of human creativity, each member contributing a unique frequency to a complex, adaptive system. Marcus Rodriguez had been tracking the Calxar's increasingly desperate attempts to understand human communication. Their data collection had become frantic, almost obsessive. Each attempt to categorize human behavior only revealed more about their own limitations. A new mission took shape, one that would push the boundaries of human resistance to its absolute limit. Zain had discovered a critical vulnerability in the Calxar's communication infrastructure. Their neural harvesting technology operated on a principle of absolute predictability. By introducing deliberate, calculated unpredictability, they could create cascading system failures. The plan was audacious. They would create a distributed network of resistance cells that operated on principles entirely foreign to the Calxar's understanding of communication and strategy. Each cell would be a microcosm of human potential. A retired ballet dancer in Paris would coordinate with a quantum physicist in Tokyo. A street artist in Rio would share critical intelligence with a deaf communication specialist in New York. Their communication would be a living, breathing entity, part technology, part emotion, part pure human creativity. Rodriguez would lead the primary infiltration team. Their target, a massive Calxar communication hub that served as the primary neural data collection center for the European invasion zone. The team was anything but traditional. Besides Rodriguez and Zain, it included Elena Sharma, the quantum physicist; Marcus Rodriguez, the Special Forces veteran; Sophie, the teenage communication specialist; Aria, a deaf communication expert who understood vibration and emotion in ways most couldn't comprehend. Their approach would be a carefully choreographed dance of deliberate chaos. As they prepared, Zane revealed the full complexity of his quantum emotional algorithm. It wasn't just a communication method. It was a way of transforming human experience into a form of living information that the Kaltsar couldn't process. "We're not just sending messages," Zane explained, his eyes bright with a combination of scientific passion and something deeper. "We're sending the entire complexity of human experience. Every moment of joy, pain, creativity, transformed into a communication method that's part science, part art, part pure emotion." The infiltration began as a seemingly chaotic series of actions: a street performance in Madrid, a mathematical lecture in Cambridge, a children's dance recital in Seoul. Each event was carefully designed to create specific quantum interference patterns that would disrupt the Kaltsar's neural harvesting technology. Rodriguez's team moved with a precision that looked like improvisation. They weren't following a traditional military strategy. They were creating a living, breathing communication network that adapted in real time. As they approached the Kaltsar communication hub, the alien collective began to experience something they had never encountered: true uncertainty. Their computational models began to fail. Predictive algorithms collapsed. The very foundation of their technological superiority started to crumble. "They're trying to understand," Dr. Sharma whispered, watching the system's response. "But understanding isn't calculation. It's something else entirely." The turning point had arrived. Humanity was no longer just resisting. They were redefining the very concept of communication, of intelligence, of potential. And the Kaltsar had no defense against it. The world had become a classroom of resistance. Every school, community center, and underground gathering space transformed into a training ground for humanity's most unconventional war. Children became communication specialists. Elders became strategic advisors. The entire human species was reimagining itself as a living, breathing resistance network. In Buenos Aires, a group of elementary school students developed a communication system using dance and rhythmic patterns. In Mumbai, retired engineers created electromagnetic interference devices from salvaged electronics. In Cape Town, a network of artists began encoding resistance messages in street art and musical performances. Rodriguez watched the global resistance take shape from their Alpine headquarters. The makeshift command center looked less like a military installation and more like a vibrant, chaotic creative workshop. Holographic displays intermingled with hand-drawn maps. Quantum algorithms sat beside children's drawings. Cutting-edge technology merged with human creativity. Zane Khan had become the architect of their most revolutionary weapon, a distributed communication network that operated on principles of human emotional complexity. "They're looking for patterns," he explained, mapping out intricate quantum communication pathways. "We're going to give them patterns they can't possibly understand." Dr. Elena Sharma worked alongside him, her quantum physics background providing the scientific framework for what seemed like pure magic. "Our neural networks create interference patterns that defy their computational models," she said, her fingers tracing complex mathematical equations that looked more like abstract art. "We're not just resisting. We're fundamentally reimagining communication itself." The Kaltsar had begun to experience something unprecedented: internal fractures. Some members of the alien collective had become fascinated by human resistance. These defectors began providing crucial intelligence, revealing the deep philosophical cracks in the Kaltsar's supposedly monolithic society. They described a collective that was more fragile than it appeared, a technological civilization built on the assumption of absolute predictability. Marcus Rodriguez, the Special Forces veteran, had transformed the Resistance's training approach. Traditional military tactics gave way to something entirely new. Training sessions looked like elaborate improvisation workshops. Resistance fighters learned to communicate through music, art, emotional resonance, methods that defied traditional technological interception. Sophie, the teenage communication specialist, had developed a global network of young resistance members. They used a communication method that was part cryptography, part performance art. A street performance in Rio could carry critical intelligence. A children's dance recital in Tokyo could disrupt Calxar communication nodes. The resistance had become a living organism. Each resistance cell operated with incredible autonomy, yet remained connected through an adaptive network that the Calxar couldn't comprehend. They weren't fighting a traditional war. They were conducting a global improvisation, a collective performance of human potential. Zane's quantum emotional algorithm had evolved into something far more sophisticated. It wasn't just a communication tool, it was a method of transforming human experience into a form of living information. Every moment of joy, pain, creativity became a potential weapon against the Calxar's rigid computational approach. The Calxar's attempts to predict human behavior became increasingly desperate. Their computational models collapsed under the weight of human unpredictability. Each attempt to categorize human resistance only revealed more about their own fundamental limitations. In schools around the world, a new curriculum emerged. Children learned communication methods that blended technology, art, emotion, and pure creativity. They were training to be something more than soldiers. They were becoming living communication networks. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A group of Calxar individuals, those fascinated by human resistance, began to break away from their collective. They provided insights into the alien society's deepest vulnerabilities. The Calxar weren't a unified entity, but a fragile collective held together by technological assumptions that human resistance was systematically dismantling. Rodriguez looked at the team around her. They weren't traditional warriors. They were artists, scientists, children, elders, a living proof that humanity's strength wasn't in technology, but in its infinite, beautiful complexity. We're not just fighting, Rodriguez told the assembled resistance members. We're rewriting the entire concept of communication, of intelligence, of potential. The Calxar had invaded expecting a technological conquest. Instead, they had awakened something far more powerful, a species learning to understand its true potential. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone had predicted. Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of a global network that defied every computational model the Calxar had ever constructed. Around her, a team that represented the true depth of human potential prepared for the most critical moment in human history. The target was the primary Calxar communication hub, a massive neural network that stretched across the European continent. It wasn't a traditional military target. It was a living, breathing computational organism that the Calxar believed represented the pinnacle of technological achievement. Zane Khan's quantum emotional algorithm hummed with an energy that was part science, part pure human creativity. We're not just going to disrupt their system, he explained, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that looked more like an abstract painting than a technological control panel. We're going to show them something they've never encountered. Dr. Elena Sharma had spent weeks preparing the final assault. Her quantum physics background had transformed their resistance into a sophisticated weapon of pure human complexity. Their entire technological framework is based on absolute predictability, she said, her eyes blazing with scientific passion. We're going to introduce them to the beauty of uncertainty. The team was a carefully selected group of human potential. Rodriguez, military precision and strategic thinking. Zane, quantum communication specialist. Elena, theoretical physicist. Marcus, special forces veteran. Sophie, communication network prodigy. Area, expert in nonverbal communication. Their approach was a carefully choreographed dance of deliberate chaos. Global resistance cells had been preparing for months. In Rio, a group of street artists began a synchronized performance that would create specific quantum interference patterns. In Tokyo, a mathematical lecture would introduce deliberate computational disruptions. In New York, a children's dance recital would transmit complex emotional frequencies. The Calxar Communication Hub was a marvel of technological engineering. Smooth, obsidian-like surfaces reflected nothing, absorbed everything. Massive neural network tendrils reached out across continents, collecting and processing data with terrifying efficiency. But today, everything would change. As the resistance team approached, Zane activated the first phase of their plan. His quantum emotional algorithm began to broadcast something the Calxar had never encountered: pure, unfiltered human experience. Memories cascaded through the alien network: a child's first bicycle ride, the moment of falling in love, the pain of loss, the joy of creation. Fragments of human experience transformed into a communication method that was part science, part art, part pure emotion. The Calxar system began to experience something unprecedented: true uncertainty. Computational models collapsed. Predictive algorithms disintegrated. The very foundation of their technological superiority started to crumble under the weight of human complexity. Marcus Rodriguez managed the physical infiltration, using techniques that defied traditional military strategy. They weren't destroying the system, they were fundamentally reimagining it. Sophie's global communication network came into play. Children, artists, scientists, a distributed network of human creativity began to send simultaneous transmissions. Each message was a quantum disruption, a deliberate introduction of uncertainty into the Calxar's rigid computational framework. Aria, using her expertise in nonverbal communication, began to translate human emotional states into a form of quantum interference that the Calxar couldn't process. It was communication beyond language, beyond technology, a direct transmission of human potential. The Calxar communication hub began to experience a total systemic breakdown. Their neural networks, designed to collect and categorize, were suddenly confronted with the impossible complexity of human experience. Each attempted computational response created more uncertainty, more interference. "They're trying to understand," Elena whispered, watching the system's response. "But understanding isn't calculation. It's something else entirely." Rodriguez looked at her team. They weren't traditional soldiers. They were living proof that humanity's strength wasn't in technology, but in its infinite, beautiful complexity. The final transmission was a masterpiece of human potential, a global broadcast that was part art, part science, part pure emotion. Millions of individual human experiences transformed into a quantum communication method that the Calxar could never comprehend. The communication hub began to collapse, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of its own existence. Humanity had done more than resist. They had redefined the very concept of intelligence, of communication, of potential. And the Calxar had no defense against it. The aftermath was not a battlefield, but a profound philosophical transformation. In the days following the collapse of the Calxar communication hub, something extraordinary happened. The alien collective didn't retreat or retaliate. Instead, they began to unravel, not through violent destruction, but through a process of fundamental reimagination. Rodriguez stood in the makeshift command center, watching holographic displays that tracked the Calxar's systemic breakdown. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense of war. It was a complete philosophical deconstruction. Zane Khan approached, a data pad filled with complex quantum analyses. "They're experiencing something unprecedented," he explained, his voice a mixture of scientific fascination and compassion. "Total cognitive dissonance. Their entire understanding of intelligence is collapsing." Dr. Elena Sharma stood nearby, her quantum physics background providing context to the extraordinary events. "We didn't defeat them," she said, tracing complex interference patterns on a holographic display. "We introduced them to a completely different way of understanding existence." The Calxar leadership, if it could be called a leadership, began to fragment. What was once a monolithic collective started to show signs of individual consciousness. Beings that had existed as purely computational entities began to experience something terrifyingly new: individual thought. Diplomatic negotiations were anything but traditional. The first meetings took place in a converted alpine research facility. Representatives from around the world sat alongside the Calxar individuals who had begun to break away from their collective. It wasn't a peace treaty being negotiated. It was a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself. Marcus Rodriguez, the Special Forces veteran, found himself in an unexpected role. His experience in conflict resolution became crucial in managing the delicate interactions. The Calxar representatives, no longer a unified collective, struggled to comprehend the concept of individual diplomacy. Sophie, the teenage communication specialist, played a pivotal role. Her ability to communicate through multiple channels, art, mathematics, emotion, became a bridge between human and Calxar understanding. She demonstrated how communication was far more than the transmission of information. The most surprising development came from the Calxar themselves. Those individuals who had first become fascinated by human resistance now sought to understand the source of humanity's strength. They weren't defeated enemies. They were beings in the process of a fundamental transformation. Your resistance was not about technology. One Calxar representative attempted to explain. Its communication, a complex mix of mathematical precision and emerging emotional understanding. It was about something we cannot yet fully comprehend. Zane's quantum emotional algorithm became a critical tool in these negotiations. It allowed for a form of communication that went beyond language, beyond traditional diplomatic frameworks. Emotions, experiences, potential. These became the new language of negotiation. The global resistance network that had formed during the conflict didn't dissolve. Instead, it transformed. Schools continued to teach the communication methods developed during the invasion. Children learned approaches to problem solving that blended art, science, emotion, and pure creativity. Rodriguez recognized that the true victory wasn't military, it was philosophical. Humanity had demonstrated that intelligence was not about computational power, but about adaptability, creativity, and the capacity to reimagine potential. The Calxar were experiencing a collective awakening, discovering individual consciousness for the first time. Diplomatic discussions revealed the depth of the transformation. The Calxar's technological superiority had been a form of collective limitation. By experiencing human resistance, they had discovered the power of individual thought, of emotional complexity, of unpredictability. Dr. Sharma documented the extraordinary process. They're learning what it means to be individual, she explained. To experience uncertainty. To understand that knowledge is not about perfect calculation, but about continuous reimagination. The final diplomatic sessions were less about resolution and more about mutual discovery. The Calxar sought to understand the source of human potential. Humanity offered not technological secrets, but a fundamental approach to existence, one of continuous adaptation, creativity, and hope. Rodriguez looked at the team that had become far more than a resistance group. They had become ambassadors of a new way of understanding intelligence itself. We didn't just resist, she told the assembled diplomats and recovering Calxar representatives. We demonstrated the true potential of conscious experience. The invasion was over. But something far more significant had begun, a fundamental reimagining of what it means to be intelligent, to be alive, to be potential itself. 5 years after the invasion, the world had become unrecognizable. Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the International Collaborative Research Station, watching a joint human Calxar research team work on a breakthrough quantum communication project. The station itself was a testament to the transformation, a living symbol of how a near-catastrophic invasion had reshaped galactic understanding. Zane Khan approached, his once military posture softened by years of diplomatic and scientific collaboration. "They're still trying to understand us," he said, watching the Calxar researchers work. Their once rigid forms had become more fluid, more individual. Every day, they discover something new about the nature of consciousness. The global education system had been completely reimagined. Schools were no longer just institutions of learning, but laboratories of human potential. Children learned communication methods that blended art, science, emotion, and pure creativity. The resistance techniques developed during the invasion had become foundational to human understanding of intelligence itself. Dr. Elena Sharma was now the lead of the Interspecies Communication and Potential Research Institute. Her work had become the bridge between human understanding and the emerging Calxer individual consciousness. "We're not just studying communication," she explained to a group of international researchers. "We're exploring the very nature of conscious experience." The Calxer transformation was ongoing and profound. What had begun as a technological collective was now a complex society of individuals experiencing consciousness for the first time. Some embraced their new individual potential with enthusiasm. Others struggled with the concept of individual identity. Support networks, both human and Calxer, had emerged to help manage this extraordinary transition. Marcus Rodriguez, now a key diplomatic advisor, spent much of his time working with Calxer individuals struggling to understand individual experience. "It's not about teaching," he often said. "It's about experiencing, about potential." Sophie, no longer a teenage communication specialist, but now a renowned interspecies communication expert, had developed entirely new communication methodologies. Her work bridged not just language barriers, but fundamental differences in conscious experience. The technologies developed during the Resistance became the foundation of a new approach to understanding consciousness: quantum communication algorithms, emotional transfer technologies, methods of sharing experience that went beyond traditional language. Global governance had transformed. The United Nations had become the Collaborative Potential Council, an organization that saw diversity not as a challenge to be managed, but as a fundamental source of strength and innovation. Area, the DIF communication specialist who had been crucial during the invasion, had developed communication technologies that allowed for multisensory experience sharing. Her work demonstrated that communication was far more than the transmission of information. It was the sharing of potential itself. The Calxer research team working on the station represented the depth of this transformation. Where once they had been a rigid computational collective, they now displayed individual quirks, personal interests, moments of genuine curiosity and wonder. Rodriguez reflected on the journey. The invasion had never been about technological conquest. It had been a fundamental collision of understanding, a moment that forced both humanity and the Calxer to reimagine the very nature of intelligence, of potential, of conscious experience. A young Calxer researcher approached Rodriguez, its form shifting with emotional states in a way that would have been impossible during the invasion. "We are still learning," it communicated, the message a complex blend of mathematical precision and emerging emotional nuance. About ourselves, about potential. The research station itself was a marvel of collaborative potential. Sections designed with human sensory preferences existed alongside environments tailored to Calxer computational needs. Art installations that explored communication sat alongside advanced scientific laboratories. It was a physical manifestation of the new understanding that had emerged from the conflict. Zane's quantum emotional algorithms had become the foundation of a new field of study. Consciousness research became a discipline that explored the nature of experience itself, not just for humans or Calxer, but for any potential conscious entities. As the sun set outside the station's observation deck, Rodriguez looked at the team around her. They had started as a resistance group. They had become something far more significant, ambassadors of a new way of understanding potential itself. "We didn't just survive," Rodriguez told the assembled researchers, human and Calxer alike. "We discovered something fundamental about the nature of conscious experience." The invasion was over. But the real journey, the exploration of potential itself, was just beginning.